and the universe becomes transparent to the cosmic background radiation. The next 1,000 million years create stars and galaxies and quasars. When these are present, solar systems form that create living matter. To start with, let's take the age of the universe. Now, I'm not going to argue about a young Earth, old Earth viewpoint. Let's take the most conservative viewpoint from a numbers sense. Let's assume that the universe might be in the neighborhood of 13, 15 billion years old, which would be at the outside edge of what most scientists believe. And in fact, the latest space technology actually confirms that that is the probable, at least from a scientific viewpoint, probable age of the universe. Now this equates to about 10 to the 17th power seconds. That means basically 10 with 17 zeros. Now, secondly, let's consider the amount of matter in the universe. Matter are particles, things, substance, if you will. The smallest particle, we all know that matter is made up of molecules, molecules by atoms, and atoms by subparticles. Well, if we were to say a baryon, which would be like a proton, would be the smallest particle of matter in the universe, scientists have calculated, again, through a lot of our recent technology, a maximum of about 10 to the 84th power number of baryons, or tiny little particles that would exist in the universe. Then let's consider the number of conceivable interactions of these particles with each other. What we're driving at here is what is the chance of these things randomly coming together over time to form something so complex as a reproductive cell? Well, scientists believe that the maximum number of interactions between these subatomic particles would be 10 to the 20th power. In other words, 10 with 20 zeros, essentially, per second. That's 10 to the 20th power interactions per second. Finally, let's take the number of events required to randomly produce a living cell. And again, we're getting back to some of the great research done by Harold Marowitz. Biochemists have calculated this to be 10 to the 100 billionth power of interactions. That's how many interactions would be necessary to create the very first, simplest living cell. Let me repeat that number. It's such a vast number, again, that some computers have a hard time even dealing with this number. It's 10 to the 100th billionth power. That's a huge, huge number. Okay, so let's see what this means in mathematical and probabilistic terms. What we're looking at first is the maximum possible number of atomic particle interactions that could have occurred. If you take the total amount of time, we talked about that, 10 to the 17th, times the total amount of particles in the universe, maximum, 10 to the 84th, times the maximum number of events per second, 10 to the 20th power, that equals a total possible number of interactions in the universe since the beginning of time of 10 to the 121st power. So you can look at the probability of evolution by taking the total possible number of interactions and dividing that by the number of interactions necessary to realistically create the first reproductive cell. So if you take 10 to the 121st power and you divide it by 10 to the 100 billionth power, that equals basically 1 over a huge, huge number. Any mathematician would look at that number and say, well, that number is simple. That number is 0. So mathematically and probabilistically, you can literally prove, literally verify, there was just not enough time, not enough matter, not enough space for even the very first living cell to have ever occurred on Earth. And this is something that has staggering implications. That's why when science learned that time and space had a beginning, it doesn't matter if you're a young Earth viewpoint person and looking at a 10,000-year-old Earth. It doesn't matter if you're looking at 15 billion years. And I could show you the same mathematics. It doesn't matter if it's 30 or 100 billion years. No matter what number you choose within any reason at all, there is just not enough time, matter, and space and interactions to possibly, conceivably, put this structure together to begin with. Let me tell you two stories about my watch here. Now, nothing really fancy about this watch, but as you'll be able to see, it's a combination analog and digital watch. And the first story is this. The first story deals with how this watch was created. Now, there was a project director from Japan. His name was Nomo, and he started several years ago with a team of engineers that created detailed engineering drawings for every little component in this watch. Calculations obviously had to be made to size all of the different gears that created the analog mechanism, to calibrate the timing mechanisms, and to create the integrated circuits for the part of the digital display. But in the end, what did they have? Well, really what they had was just an attractive ornament. It wasn't really a timepiece yet. And in fact, it didn't serve any purpose until somebody wound the watch up. Then it became a timepiece. Now I'm going to tell you story number 2 about how this watch evolved. You see, billions of years ago, the Earth was really much more favorable to manufacturing than it is today. There was a sea of ooze that surrounded the Earth, and the sea of ooze just happened to have all the right little elements in it that were needed for this watch. It had little teeny pieces of metal, and it had little teeny pieces of the silica that would eventually make the crystal, and little bitty pieces of paint that were all floating around in this ooze. And there was volcanic heat at the time, and over a process of a real long period of time, this volcanic heat made these particles of metal bond together. And as they continued to tumble in this ooze over billions and billions of years, a few of these pieces of metal started to form these highly precision gears, and it was very fortunate that they just happened to be exactly the right size necessary to create a timepiece. Then you had really kind of an incredibly beautiful little ornament. It just lacked one problem. It still needed somebody to wind it. Now, which of those two stories do you believe? The idea of evolution of a watch seems absurd. At least I would hope so. A single living cell is so vastly more intricate than this simple little timepiece. So much more complex than a simple watch. It's beyond comprehension. Just think about a few things. Watches don't reproduce. They don't diagnose themselves or heal themselves. They don't think. They don't create. The list goes on and on and on. So why do we laugh at some story of a evolved watch and teach evolution of a far more complex living cell? Do you know the human cell is far more complex than the most advanced manufacturing facility in the world? Now, in Darwin's time, Darwin and other scientists, such as David Hume, regarded cells as just blobs of protoplasm. They really didn't understand